Welcome everybody to Contemporary Issues class here in the end of June. And we're going to talk today about genealogy. And we've got several folks on here who have done genealogy research and looking forward to hearing from you all. And our usual announcements are please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen so we can keep the background noise down. And we are recording today, and I'm broadcasting from our Sunday school room in the church. Today, they let me sit in by myself. And as far as we know, still the in-person meetings will be in September. They're going to target letting classes and people return in September. So that's the latest I've heard. And other announcements, we have a Sunday school party planned for this summer at Ron and Alice's house on August 6th. So we will send out notice of that, but put that on your calendar. That'll be a fun get together. And any other announcements or news? What a sad news week it seemed to me with the shooting in Arvada that happened, and then the building collapse in Surfside, Florida, and they're trying still to find people in that condo collapse. Just hate to see those kind of stories. So sad. But what do you all think? What are you all following in the news? In your world, anything in particular you want to talk about? Okay, Ann, do you have your hand up there?
Yeah, we have daughters that live in, one lives in Missoula, Montana, and the other one lives in Bend, and they're having 100-degree plus. You know, for Missoula, it's really, you don't hear too much about Missoula's weather, but anyway,
Yes.
Portland is horrible. They even think it's going to be 115 there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a rumor or it's based on scientific evidence, but anyway. Also, if anybody knows anyone who lives in Georgetown Village, I just need to know more about that community. And I haven't run into anybody who really knows. That might be our next destination. It's a lovely community behind Kaiser on Arapahoe Road. So, get in touch with me if you happen to have any connection there or know anybody who has lived there. Anyway, that's it.
Okay.
So I can add that in Canada, the whole country is reeling over the discovery of several mass graves of children that were associated with the residential schools that we had in place for so many years up here. And it's Canada Day on Thursday, and most people are observing it in a very solemn way because there's just so much guilt and bereavement over this for what's happened and what we should do, and the lack of adoption of many of the resolutions that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission a few years ago. So, we knew about some of this stuff, but it's just now coming to light in real terms. So it's very hard for everyone.
That's not gotten much attention in the States here, down below. Another sad story.
Very.
We'll keep that in our prayers too. Okay. Well, let's jump on ahead and start talking about genealogy, and here's some of our stories. I'm going to share my screen and just a few thoughts before I open it up to everybody. So let me click my button here. Can you see that says genealogy on the screen? Ron, do you see that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Just from Wikipedia, a little definition of genealogy. It's the study of families, family history, and the tracing of their lineages. Genealogists use oral interviews, historical records, genetic analysis, and other records to obtain information about families. And the results are often displayed in charts or written as narratives. The pursuit of family history and origins tends to be shaped by several motives, including the desire to carve out a place in larger historical picture and a sense of responsibility to preserve the past for future generations. I like that one. I like the preserving it for future generations. Genealogists sometimes specialize in a particular group like a Scottish clan or a particular surname. Bloodlines of Salem is an example of a specialized family history group. It welcomes members who can prove descent from a participant of the Salem witch trials. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, if you want to get very specific. Curiosity can drive the family research due to adoption or separations through families, deaths, divorce. In addition to simply wanting to know who people are, they also research about hereditary diseases, a fairly new aspect of it. Genealogical research is a complex process of historical records and genetic analysis. Reliable conclusions are based on the quality of sources, the information within those sources, and other evidence. I thought that was interesting. You can't just do a family research without thinking about the authenticity of it, the quality of your research. And of course, a lot of us have done family trees like this, and this is an example where they put photos along the family tree. A nice way to do it. I haven't done that myself yet, but I think that's a nice visual way to present a family history. And just a little about the DNA test too, because a person's DNA contains information that's been passed down relatively unchanged from early ancestors. Use of DNA is sometimes used for genealogical research today. A DNA test allows two individuals to find the probability that they are or are not related within an estimated number of generations. Individual genetic tests are collected in databases to match people descended from a relatively recent common ancestor. And of course, they are, those kind of databases are common now where people can go online and just find a database based on DNA and find other folks. And I put a little line in here that says, oops, not my daddy. Sometimes folks are finding that someone is not their relative that they thought there was in the DNA research. Has anybody done the DNA research part yet? In addition to just the other research? Oh, Ron and Alice did. How did that go for you, and which one did you use?
We used Ancestry. Was it 23andMe? Or is it 29andMe? But at any rate, 23andMe, yeah, and basically it showed us where our ancestors were from.
Which countries?
Yeah, which countries? France, Germany, England, Scotland, here in the US. And Ron's is all Germany, right?
It's 60 or 70% German with some Norwegian, Swedish.
Yeah.
But all very northern Europe and Germany.
Right. Yeah, and I was contacted by one lady who said, yeah, we're probably, like third cousins or something. And that was pretty cool. Yeah.
From the DNA research she found.
Through the DNA research, yeah.
Neat. That's neat. So you thought it was pretty accurate? What came back was what you expected?
Yeah. I pretty much knew where my family was from, but this just kind of reinforced it. So.
Yep. Same with me. My brother did it. I think he did the spit in a cup method and sent it to ancestry.com, and it came back with us being 50% Swedish and 50% Slovakian, which is what we'd always heard. So it was interesting. Okay, and then the list of types of records that people are using: birth records, death records, marriage and divorce, adoption, biographies from things like Who's Who's, cemetery list, medical records, military and conscription records, newspaper articles, and obituaries. And just a couple more slides here, and then I'll open it up. One of the things I found in just researching it was one of the early things that started people getting interested was having family Bibles with our roots written in it. For a long time, that's what only way that people had family histories written down. And here's an example of one. And I wonder, do you all have one? Does anybody have a family Bible that had that kind of thing written in it?
I have one with it for a number of generations.
With a number of generations back?
Mhm.
Me too, Joe. In fact, I have one. I want to hold it up and show you. That is from 1910. It's from my great uncle, who was a Catholic priest, and it says to Father Louis Basca, 1910. And it's one that I've kind of used and kept as a family heirloom. And actually, this Bible is in Latin. So it's got fancy script in it, and it's in Latin. So it's one that I kind of started me getting interested in family history things, but it's got all the names and birth dates of relatives, that kind of thing too. I enjoyed that. So does anybody else besides Joe have one like that?
You know, that's one of those things I didn't look at. I've got about 6 really old Bibles, and going through, I need to go back and see what's in there in the front of them.
Yeah, some of them, that was the common way that people kept a family history back then. Okay, just last couple things I wanted to mention here. Some folks only want to find people who are wealthy relatives or have some meaning to them. They don't want to find those that are going to be a nuisance. A lot of people want to stay anonymous and not get into this. And lastly here, just a little bit about Jesus' genealogy, also from Wikipedia. It pointed out that the New Testament provides 2 accounts of the genealogy of Jesus, one in Matthew and the other in Luke. Matthew starts with Abraham, while Luke began with Adam. The lists are identical for a while, but then they differ radically. Matthew has 27 generations, whereas Luke had 42, and there's almost no overlap between the names on the 2 lists. I never paid attention to this before in the New Testament. Matthew begins by calling Jesus the son of David, indicating his royal origin. And those are stock phrases that are used to mean descendant, calling to mind the promises that God made to David and Abraham. Traditional scholars have put forward various theories that seek to explain why the lineage of Jesus are so different in these 2 places, such as Matthew's account, while Luke's account follows the lineage of Mary. Both start with Jesus and go through Joseph, not Mary. So there's some differences. Some critical scholars like Marcus Borg and John Crossan state that both genealogies are inventions, they think, intended to bring the messianic claims into conformity with Jewish criteria. Modern scholarship tends to see the genealogies of Jesus as theological constructs rather than factual history. Family pedigrees would not usually have been available to non-priestly families at that time, and the contradictions between the 2 lists are seen as evidence that these were not based on genealogical records. So I hadn't really read it that way before. Is that surprising to anybody else? Do you notice those contradictions? I always just looked at it as he begat him and she begat her, and I never paid attention to the details of that, but could be it's not all that factual, I suppose. Okay, let's share our own research. Ron and Alice, would you go ahead first? And then I'll ask Lois and Keith to share some of their experiences too. Tell us what you've done.
Okay, take it away.
This is a picture of myself and my sisters. Ron thought I should put pictures of us in there. I'm the little one here. So And we have a joke. My family has basically Virginia background. And so he thought, was it Far Side
Yeah.
joke was probably applicable. So we named, we're Virginians. Now, my family, we can trace back to Pocahontas. She's my 10th grade grandmother.
Really?
And this,
Wow.
really. So this is through Ancestry's help. My full name is Alice Little Page Holiday Puning. So here it is at the bottom. What Pocahontas did, she was a princess in the Iroquois nation, and she basically prevented slaughter in Jamestown. So this was back in late 1600s, and that's why we hear so much about her. She was a beautiful gal, very outgoing, and she only lived to like 21. So she did a lot in her short life.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So if it wasn't for Pocahontas, I might not be here. So also looking in this, I'm not sure if you can see it. It's got some Randolph Harrison, Carter Henry Harrison. These are people that the presidents came from, William Henry Harrison and Benjamin Harrison. So there's a cousin connection there. So the next bit I have here is for an ancestor, Bartholomew Dupuy. This was on my dad's side. He was in French Huguenot. And one advantage of going back through your history is you learn more history about what was going on back then. This is back also in the late 1600s. And the Edict of Nantes was revoked at this time. And that Edict of Nantes basically took away the ability of everybody to worship as they like. And Huguenots were Protestants. And up until this time, the Catholic Church and Protestants were living side by side. And then the French king, I think it's Henry IV, came in and revoked this Edict of Nantes. So the story goes here, my ancestor, Bartholomew Dupuy, at age 19, joined the French army. And like kids do, you know, he did what he was told, and then he became a household guard. But when the edict was revoked and he came into persecution from all the Catholics. Now, like a lot of religions, it isn't just the religion, it becomes political. And that was what was going on in this time, that the Catholic Church and the French government started massacring the Huguenots. So my ancestor and his wife, who happened to be a countess, because Bartholomew wasn't in the army, he had documents that had the king's signature on them. And so he and his wife, dressed in their uniforms, he dressed his wife up as a page, and over a 2-week period of time, they rode out through the French Alps over into Germany and escaped being killed. He and Suzanne was his wife, lived in Germany for about 14 years, and then immigrated to England. And at 1700, there were 3 ships of Huguenots that went to the US, to Virginia. Am I missing somebody?
No.
What a story.
Yeah, and
That's
here we
great.
go. Evidently, Virginia wanted the Huguenots to settle there because this was 1700, early 1700s. And this is right around Jamestown, and they were trying to attract people from other countries. So this was southwest of where Richmond, Virginia is now, and they actually had a town that they settled the Huguenots in, and they gave each family like 150 acres to farm. Now, the next one I have here, the family also, let's see, what is his name? Louis Littlepage was a descendant here in the Civil War. And he was given, along with his brother, areas of land just north of Fredericksburg in this area. Prospect Hill is where a lot of the Civil War, where this one Civil War battle was fought. And this is another picture. It's not Louis Littlepage, it's another colonel in my family. As you can see, he's got the medals and the hat. And so we're getting into a point of my family's history where it's not always what we want it to be, but it is what it is. My family was Confederate, and this man owned 19 slaves. His brother owned 50. And as Pastor was talking this morning in church, change is in family. Every family has something going on that you would rather not talk about. But I have found that with all the racist stuff going on these days, it has helped me to say, my family did this. I wish it hadn't. This was the way that it was that time. In order to survive, they were farmers. They owned slaves. At the end of the Civil War, he became a college professor at William and Mary College, and he was an inventor. So he rose above and managed to find a way to live. He is my second great grandfather. So now, once again, I want to reemphasize that all families have things that happen that we're not proud of, but for us, there's no shame.
Yeah, our senior pastor, Rev. Mark, said that his relatives owned slaves also. He knew that.
Yeah, I have run into several other people who have told me that this is in their family history. And once I start talking about, they become open too. So it's hard, you know, listening about those children that were killed in Canada. You know, I believe, Susan, weren't they like Indian descent? Native?
Right. The government had a policy to separate the children from the adults for many, many years to try to indoctrinate them to become less Indian, and they were horribly mistreated, and of course many died. So it's terrible.
It's not just our history. If I don't know how big we can make this. Is a slave schedule from 1850, and it lists here all the slaves, but it doesn't give any names. So we have no way of knowing who these people were. But, yeah. So.
Well, thank you for sharing, Alice. That was very good. Did you do all this research back that far on your own, or did you have help?
Well, as I was growing up, my mom and both of my parents always emphasized to the three of us that we were to be proud of who we were and that the family had a long history. And she talked about it, and she had a few documents that I knew existed, but it's only been during the pandemic I really started digging in and trying to review and figure out. Actually, you know, what's interesting is what these people went through. Just names on pages don't mean a whole lot to me. But like our grandson, Dylan, was really thrilled with the idea that Benjamin Harrison, the president, was in the family. He thinks that's way cool. He's 12 years old. And another little bit, I haven't completely figured out. There's an ancestor by the name of Ben Holiday, who evidently in the late 1800s there was a street here in Denver called Holiday Street. It was a red light district. It is now Market Street. There were like 2,000 prostitutes there. It's like, is there a Madam Holiday I don't know about? I'd like to find that out. So,
Yes, Alice, there's a Doc Holliday. He was a notorious bank robber.
yeah, but his name is spelled differently. My Hollladay is my family, and it was basically Scottish and English. So I don't know about.
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
Ron, if you're at the end of the slides, let's go ahead and take off the
Yeah.
share screen.
Oh, I was just going to tell Alice
Thank you.
too. I've got a contact who used to be a tour guide with History Colorado, but he would probably know Alice. So
Oh,
email me the name and I'll find out from this guy that I still do tours with. And if people are interested in tours of Denver and even Colorado, Treasure Box Tours is a company that started as a result of cutting back from History Colorado, Trek and whatever tours Paul and I might have been going on. Anyway, I can give you more information, but it's an amazing company to find out history. You know, we're talking about genealogy, but history in our own backyard. You know, I'm going on a tour with them Tuesday of Harvard Gulch area. Anyway, but let me know the name because I bet Kevin could figure it out for you.
Okay. Yeah, it's not that long. Well, 120 years ago, 150 years, so not that far back.
Another one is Tom Noel. He knows everything about everything in Denver, in Colorado.
And there is a Colorado Genealogical Society. I know you can find their website and they help with all kinds of things in the state.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alice. Didn't know you were related to Pocahontas.
Don't I look Indian?
Not exactly. You never know. That's right. Well, Lois and Keith, tell us a little about your German connections and when you were there, places that you went to.
Well, and I had not prepared this, but but when the topic came up, we lived in Germany for 4 years, and as a result of being there, my uncle sent us letters that he had that I'm sure my mother didn't know about, but they were letters written in Altdeutsch, the old German script, and we had a difficult time reading them and translating them, but we found one of our old neighbors, an elderly gentleman who we had a great friendship with, and Lois Jean and Herr Tepfer sat down and laboriously translated these letters into modern German. And we discovered that there was a good possibility that there might still be some people living from those letters. And so we traveled to northern Germany, up in the Hanover area, in search of the family Bredemeyer, which was my grandmother's maiden name, and looking for a little village named Kleinenfelde, which simply means little ford in the river. And of course, there was no little Kleinenfelde, or there was no little ford in the river, no Kleinenfelde. But we did find a guest house by the name of Bredemeyer. So we stopped in, looked at knocked on the door of the guest house, and the guy who met us said, you know, I don't think we're any relation and I don't know anybody about this, but he said, you know, my mother's is here. He said, she's like 90 years old, but she said, she might remember this situation. Well, to make a long story short, she said, that's another Bredemeyer, but she explained to him where they were. He said, follow me. We got back in our car. He drove us over to this other Bredemeyer. And sure enough, it was the right one. We connected with two of the gals who were mentioned in these letters. One was mentioned by her confirmation history in a letter. Another was mentioned by her marriage. Well, it turns out both were still alive. Both were very active and and of course full of the history of our family. What we did was we discovered that the one who was married in the letters 50 years before was celebrating her golden wedding anniversary with her husband. We went up about 6 months later and attended the golden wedding anniversary with about 350 relatives who I did not know. But I surely knew them after that golden wedding anniversary weekend, because I think I probably every time they had an affair, did some part of celebration, it ended with a toast and a dance and everything else. And we just had a wonderful time. But the story is way too long to I've got to condense it. But the important thing is that I've recorded all of the events that happened in letters to my grandchildren, in journals that I have maintained for the grandchildren. So the story is in place, and of course we have pictures of it. Our sons actually remember. Our sons were like 10 and 8 when we did this. So they still remember going and playing in the barn, and they remember the family meals that we had. They were an agrarian family that goes back a long, long way. Back in, certainly the family history goes back into the early 1800s. But interesting, the letters that came over in the early 1900s were letters of destitution, how impoverished they were, how they were suffering so much, and hoping that the American relatives that they were sending the letters to in Chicago could help them out financially.
Sure.
And of course, the American relatives in Chicago were just barely surviving, working in slaughterhouses and things like that. So it was a tough life on both sides of the big pond. And there was probably not a lot of help to go either way. But I'll wrap this up with just as we met with them and shared actually 4 or 5 days total with them, between the golden wedding anniversary and our initial excursion up to find them. We discovered a 50-year history of this couple that were married for 50 years. We visited one of the old farmhouses where my grandmother was born. We then, armed with the names of great grandparents and whatnot, we were able to go back and see where my where my grandfather immigrated with his father through Ellis Island back in the 1800s, or the late 1800s. And also the final story I'll relate, that we have no Pocahontases or nobody famous in our area, but Heinrich and Lena, the golden wedding anniversary couple that we went to their church celebration of their 50th, and then the family celebration, which lasted till 4 o'clock in the morning at the town fest hall, were presented on their wedding day a picture by the Hanover Jumping Horse Society, because they were a prominent breeder of Hanover jumping horses. On the golden wedding anniversary, they were presented by the same jumping society another original oil painting that was made at that time, guarded for 50 years, and presented to them for their 50th wedding anniversary 50 years after it had been painted for them. And I thought, only in Germany could someone have that much patience and that much tradition and that much confidence that they would maintain that kind of a tradition. But certainly a wonderful, wonderful experience for us that is far too lengthy to share the whole thing. But a bit of
so
living
neat.
history. a bit of living history for our family that is now recorded in journals. And interestingly, upon the death of Heinrich and Lena and Minna, there's no longer any contact there. We know where the contact would be. My son, who lived in Germany for a while, or went back and went to school in Germany, did try to contact them after the deaths, and the family, the remaining family, had no interest, younger generation, of renewing that connection. But maybe someday, who knows? But at least for us, we have pictures, we have the stories, and we have the memory, which is, I think, what history and genealogy is really all about.
Yes, yes. Thanks for sharing. It's so neat that you were there in the original country. I'll
I'd
share
like to-
just
Oh.
briefly. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you're done, I'd like to share some of mine as well.
Sure, absolutely, Linda. Okay, let me just share mine for just a second. This was a picture of my father's grandparents. They came from Slovakia in the late 1800s. And I just love this picture of grandma. She kind of looks like the granny on the Beverly Hillbillies. I just get a kick out of that. And they came over from Slovakia in the 1880s, I believe, and settled in Pennsylvania and started a laundry business and spelled our last name different at that time. But I've always kind of wanted to go back and find that little village where they are. I know it has 184 people in it in Slovakia, because one of my other distant relatives had done that and sent me pictures. And so that's on my list, Keith, is to plan a trip to go back to the original country and village and even see if there's any relatives I could still find there and talk to. I think that would be fun.
Well, Steve, one word of warning. I did the same thing with the Galloways in Scotland, and I went to the churches looking for records. And what I found out was that every Galloway was killed in World War I or World War II, and there was nobody left. They said we went to the village of New Galloway, and I asked the postmaster, who also happened to sell me a mutton sandwich. I said, are there any Galloways in New Galloway? And he said, there's one old farmer who now is retired and winters in southern England. But he said, there aren't any more. And I said, well, I know why. They all got killed in the war because of the records I see in the church.
Yep. Okay. Linda, please tell us about your story, and anybody else. I want to make rest of time for you to share too.
Well, I've documented in a number of photo books. This is the main one that has the family. I don't know how to do this, but there is one of the charts that we developed. But the story I'd like to share is that my daughter and I, in about 2002, went back to Scotland. My mother's name is Jean McMillan McDonald, so there is a big history on that side of the family in Scotland. And we went to the village that my grandparents and great-grandparents had grown up in.
Oh, no.
And were taken in hand by a local resident to a library in an adjacent town, because this is just a very small town. And they opened all the records to us. We were able to get a lot of family history. My mother and aunt had also done a lot of history, so we knew that there was a bunch of history in Lennoxton. And we were able to find the memorial arch by the kirk that had a lot of our relatives' names on it. We located not only the cemetery, but also the headstones that had our family members listed on it. But the story I'd like to share is my grandfather. We also found, I'll show one more. The family dairy was still the building was still existent. My grandmother and grandfather inherited or ran the local dairy in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And my great grandmother apparently was quite a character and came down really hard because she didn't feel like they were doing the best job. So he got a bull from Argentina to make the herd better. Unfortunately, that bull brought anthrax with him and destroyed the entire herd. So at that point, the great grandmother said, you guys better go to America because, you're done here. You're just not running the business very well. So in 1906, that side of the family immigrated to the United States. And I have a lot of the original documents, including my grandfather's naturalization certificate. I have birth certificates for them. And between my cousin and I, we have been able to really put together a lot of the pictures and figure out who these people are. And, it's resulted in 2 or 3 of these books that, because we've ceased to trust the electronic means. Some of the records were on, floppy disks and prior methods of storage. So, and then I also followed up when they came to this country. My grandfather, who was a dairy farmer, ended up going to a little town in Iowa and became a builder there. His cousin or something had established, and it was a little town called, I can't even remember the name of it, Hocking, which now has 6 residents left. But I was able to go to that town, and the local town close by said, you need to go there and talk to Andrew, and he will show you around. Well, I went out to this little town. The gentleman was living in the old schoolhouse, had remodeled it. He took me all over the neighborhood, showed me, he said, here was where your mom was probably born, in one of these little houses. And so it was fascinating to find a little town in Iowa that really opened up. Then they took me back to the museum, and they said, here's the key, go in, stay as long as you want. If you find any records that you want, bring them over to the Chamber of Commerce and we'll copy them for you. So I got a lot of the records of the little town where she was born and what went on there.
Well, you had a lot of good luck. That's terrific. And what a trip back to Scotland.
It was great for my daughter as well.
I'll bet.
To see that kind of continuity in her.
I'll bet. Yeah, it reminds me that on my mother's side, my grandmother came from Sweden when she was 21 because she'd had a child out of wedlock at that time and was kind of shunned in her community. So she came to America to start a new life, and she brought pictures with her that I still have today, but I don't know who the people are in the pictures because they were never identified. There's no writing on them. So that's what I tell people and telling our kids, keep these pictures, write on it who it is and what the connection is. Otherwise, the future generations, they won't know and won't be able to find out.
I have one of the old pictures that is equal to yours in terms of dowdy old ladies.
That's great. Ann, I saw you had your hand up. Or Judy.
Yeah, connection with putting names on the back. One thing I've done for our daughters is make photo books, and with sticky notes or note paper, added little stories that went with the pictures so they would have some kind of connection. And my family, I'm half Norwegian. My mom's relatives came from Norway, and she had just an envelope with a P.O. box number on it. My brother was stationed in Germany, got a European discharge way back in 1969. And she said, go find the relatives in Norway. This is their address. And so she said, I'll buy you a Eurail pass, if you can find them. And he did. North of the Arctic Circle is a town called Tromsø, and they are 2 or 3 hours from Tromsø. And he arrived without them knowing to the general store. The guy at the general store fortunately spoke English. And so he called them up because they're just Norwegian speakers, the relatives were, and they came and picked him up, and he stayed with them for a week.
Oh, how neat.
And one of their daughters
Wonderful.
knew English, but she was very shy and didn't translate much, but the local school teacher did for him. And they were all prepared for him to stay for the winter, because he says, well, we could use extra people. Or, my brother was in his mid-20s then, but he said, well, I'll come back. And 10 years later, he did. And he couldn't believe the changes. When he went in 1969, they still had an outhouse. They did not have many modern conveniences, but the Air Force Base had moved in and brought more money into the area. And then, speaking of museums, we do have a family museum. They wanted to preserve the Norwegian way of life on the little farms. People were moving away, that whole history kind of thing was being lost. So my brother had, a tour of this local building that was part of our family. And he said he couldn't believe all the stuff they had that was connected to our family. And since then, I've reconnected with the daughter who didn't speak much. She's 60, in her 60s now, and on Facebook. And it's just been really neat because we've done things back and forth. I haven't been able to go back. I still have, a goal to do that. But it was just, I would really encourage people, if they can find, especially share those stories with your grandchildren or your adult children now, because even if they don't express an interest, they get more interested. Our daughters are much more interested nowadays, and the more you can write down or
Yes.
than just sharing verbally, because they'll forget too,
Yes, that's what I wanted to talk about in our last 10 minutes here, about how to get others interested and share with the kids and grandkids. But Judy, go first.
Okay, I'm a Swedish. My ancestors are from Sweden.
Oh,
And
hello, fellow Swede.
yeah, I was a Johnson. But anyway, one side is very Swedish and the other is German. And I'm very fortunate. One of my mother's cousins did a lot of research, and I have bins of pictures and photos, and they all would never smile in the pictures because they had to be still for a certain amount of time for the picture to take, and they would always at some point have their pictures taken in front of their current vehicle, their car. Have you had any pictures of where they stand in front of their car so the year of the car and
Yes.
Well, I also have the ship records of it as they came into Ellis Island. And that's memorable to me. I don't know what to do with all these things. I've digitalized them, but when they came at that time, they were wanting to farm, and the first generation would move to about Indiana or in that area. And then they would move on to Nebraska because of the Northwest Ordinance. And if you farmed some land for 7 years, you got it free from the government. So they would farm for 7 years and have land. We still have that land today, and almost not every day, but I still check corn prices because I know the value of corn and soybean prices there in Nebraska along the South Platte River. If you're going along Interstate 80 and you go by the archway, look to the south, and there's a lot of our farmland there. And over the years, there's been 5 generations. And the house that I grew up is in my nephew and his children are living there now. It's along the South Platte River. I have all the records. I went to Stromsburg, Nebraska, to the courthouse and got the marriage license, the death certificates, the land transfers, and all those kind of things. And I just don't know what to do with all of these hard copies of things, but at the cemetery there in Kearney, Nebraska, there is a Johnson corner. You can go through and see Bent Johnson when he was born and when he died, and his first wife died on the ship coming over, and then he remarried when he got to the Midwest. And but one thing that I do to help my kids appreciate this is when they all live in Colorado now. 6 of my grandchildren that are college age now are, when they were 10 years old, I took them on a week trip back to Nebraska to see the good life. You hear in Nebraska, the good life. And I showed them all the farms and all the different things of growing up that their daddies did and things. And so that's kind of how I've done that. I have all those pictures and those digitalized things of that. So there's just much more to tell, but they were highly involved with farming and with state government. Several state senators and leaders of the state were involved from that side of the family. I don't know quite as much about the German side. I do know that when times were hard in Nebraska, and many of you may know this, people moved to Washington, to Yakima Valley, because there was a good income from the fruit, in the central part of Washington state. So some of my dad's Peckman relatives were out there. And one time I took him on a trip to go out to see the history of that. And so that was real enjoyable. But that's all. I could talk forever, but I won't.
Thank you, Judy Johnson.
Yeah,
Appreciate that. Yeah. Oh, well, every family has a story, as they say. And well, what do you think? How can we get kids interested, and what's the best format to save these family histories? Should we be putting them online so kids in the future can just look them up online, or should we also save the print books that we've created? What are you all thinking?
Having lost a lot of digital records early on, I recommend hard copy. And right now I am working on, which is kind of my history. My daughter gave me a service called Storyworth. And each week they send a question related to heritage, and I answer it and can add pictures to it. And at the end of the year, they will create a book.
Oh, nice.
And print it. I'm loving it because it really allows me to kind of go back and review some of this history and take a look at values and who people were in the past. So I would recommend that you just take a look at it. I think it's $100 a year or something.
It's called what, Linda?
Storyworth, W-O-R-T-H.
Okay, thank you.
And the other, and I'm a great believer, as you saw, of the solid books, because I've made copies of them for my kids and for other family members. But I just wanted to point out, my cousin was a World War II hump pilot, and he created a separate self-published book of his recollections just of that era and that time. And the whole family has it now.
Wonderful.
And so smaller books like that cover one section of life I think are valuable to the family.
Yes.
things like Shutterfly are good for that too.
Yeah, right. And I use Peekaboo for my books, and I've made probably 50 different books of, I try to make one every year or every other year of my grandkids and family, so that they have that record going forward.
Great. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I want to ask Shannon, as mother of youngsters, what do you think we can do to get young people interested, Shannon?
I mean, it's hard for me. I don't, our family is very small. I'm estranged from my parents. Some of you probably know. So my kids are really interested. Like 12 years ago, I had a great aunt that reached out to my mother. And she had done this is a passion project, this whole genealogy thing. And so we found out some things my mother wasn't super proud of. I guess her dad she didn't know her bio dad. So he had been in Leavenworth for being a con artist. And and then, but we had good things too. We had, my great grandmother was a Cherokee, and she wrote a book about the Trail of Tears. And on my dad's side, it's Osage, and my great uncle was an assistant coach to Barry Switzer at
Oh,
OU. So we have some fun stuff. My kids are super interested. I think just naturally kids love those stories. And unfortunately, my mother shut it all down. So I don't know if I have no way of getting a hold of these documents or kind of researching it. And she made it very clear that she wasn't going to help. So I don't know a lot, unfortunately, about my history other than we are Native American. How much though? My girls were funny. They were like, we could have gotten a free education.
yeah.
But I do remember going to ceremonial meetings, with my great uncle's tribe when I was real little. Those are some of my first memories, but I don't have any way to ask or follow up on that. So
Very
I think it's
interesting.
a natural interest. I think kids do love to just hear those stories. I don't think it takes a lot of work.
You know how people have science fairs in their school? My grandchildren, 6 of them in 3 different areas of schools of Colorado, had ancestry fairs, and they made big posters, and they contacted me and they wanted pictures of relatives and things for that on both sides of the family, and they still have them. That was a really good learning experience. I think a lot of it was following a social studies curriculum about immigration and so on, but they did the ancestry, and so they learned a lot. They asked a lot of questions, and they became very, very interested.
Yeah,
Terrific idea.
Alice and Judy, this matter of oral histories and young people being quite interested is they're doing around the country in schools and high schools oral history projects. When I was in the university business up at UNC, teamed up with CSU and a professor friend, we did oral histories in nursing homes, and got the Greeley Gazette to put it together in a book form, and they went to the History Museum, Colorado History Museum. But this matter, Steve, of getting kids to do and to encourage in curricula, social studies classes, history classes, etc., oral history projects, interviewing older historians. Every older person is an elder and is a librarian themselves, but doing those recordings, I think, really taps the interest level, which is natural for many children, younger people. So that certainly is an avenue to be explored and to be encouraged.
I think it should
Yes.
be noted that people in this room anyway, there's a certain privilege, I think, in knowing where you come from.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people, that's just not something, they don't know their biological father or even their biological parents. And I think that developing sensitivities that not everyone can go all the way back to the beginnings of their humble beginnings isn't important, because that can come with some shame and embarrassment. And it's, it feels like not everyone's excited, I think, for that perspective, to do a heritage project when maybe, you don't know anything. Like I don't know a lot. So it's hard, but
Good
I think it's
point.
interesting for sure.
And the worthiness of young people knowing their histories. A few years back, not too many, a New York Times ran a research piece that indicated that the young people who survived the 9/11 trauma did a better job of coping with the trauma and the tragedy. Since we were talking about mental health in our sermon today, and certainly much of this, there's certainly reason to believe, in some research justification, that by doing such, we are making stronger individuals as far as being able to weather the storms and the many of the tribulations and difficulties of life. So, this is not just, it's fun and enjoyable, but it also has some very strong mental health underpinnings to be encouraged, I think, on several levels.
Steve, you mentioned that you had somebody had a child out of wedlock. I had an aunt that did too. And, they just gave the baby up for adoption. And I've looked and looked, I can't get the records opened. I've tried to find that cousin that would be around my age, but they sealed those records and they're not available. So that was a sad part, that I wanted to find that cousin someday.
Another good point. Joe, go ahead. You started to say something as we're wrapping up here.
No, I just commented, it was well said about the mental health.
Yes, definitely.
Hey,
Lots of
Shannon,
benefits to doing this. Go ahead, Alice.
I just wanted to tell Shannon that, online like ancestry.com, they can backtrack even without your mom. They can, as long as you know grandparents, it's amazing website, this database. So, you might want to explore that if you're really interested.
And you can also hire personal historians. There's an association of personal historians in Colorado. If you want to pay a little bit, they'll do all of the sleuthing and investigative work and also formatting it for you. So personal historians, you can go to them and they can certainly render professional advisement and help in this area.
No, I'll definitely check out ancestry.com. There's a joke in my family that if it can be found on the internet, Shannon can find it. So I just out of respect for my mother, I haven't really gone into it, but I know my kids have asked me questions. And so that is something I'd like to do for them, is to give them a better family history than what I had growing up.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, for a good discussion. I'm sorry we didn't get to every person on this call to ask more, but we'll do this again sometime. I can tell we like talking about this. So, and you never know who is in your class or in your church and what their story is. So, thank you so much. We will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good job, Steve.
Thank you,
job.
Joe.
Way to go.
See you next week, Susan, or on the 4th, July 3rd or 4th.